Get your mother-loving ears on because your big-time radio DJ's got news. PayPal lets you choose how you want to pay for all the stuff. With PayPal, I can pay in-store, pay online, or pay over time. What's that? You want this translated into song? I hope you're sitting down. You can pay your own way. You keep those ears on, you hear? Don't just pay, baby. PayPal.
Learn more at paypal.com.
Every Who down in Who Newville liked the holidays a ton. But where to get great prices on gifts, they had no idea. None. They searched and they searched for great gifts under $25. Gifts for spouses and friends and even their toddlers. When suddenly one Who shouted, Walmart has what you want, knowing they have Lego, Tree Hut, and low prices to flaunt. So they enjoy the holiday season as Who's often do. Cheering and shouting, Walmart has incredible gifts. Who knew? Find gifts they'll love under $25 at Walmart.
Hello everybody and welcome to 3D Printing Basics. I just wanted to let you know that if you're interested in getting every single episode a week before its release and ad-free, then please head over to my Patreon. The link will be in the show notes, and like I said, you can get every single episode ad-free and a week before its initial release date. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you like this episode. Hello and welcome back to 3D Printing Basics. This is episode number 87, and in this week's episode we are going to be going over what makes a print fail. I have been having some issues, especially during this week, with some layer shifting problems, and once I finally figured out what the reason is, still haven't yet, but I'm working on it. Once I finally figure out what it is, I will certainly let you guys know. But it sort of gave me the inspiration to make an episode kind of outlining a couple of reasons why prints fail and why there might be a reason for it and what you can look for to try and solve the problems. Because as long as 3D printers are around, we are going to have print failures, and there's going to be some common issues like layer shifting, stringing, support failures. That it's just always going to be a thing, and so why not talk about it so we can get some more insight on it and see if we can find some common remedies to try and fix these issues. With that being said, let's get right into the episode. First things first, I just want to establish that it's really important to understand not just if your printer is going to fail or what prints are susceptible to failure, but why your prints are failing. If you can understand why your prints are failing and quickly make those adjustments, you're going to save tons of time. Obviously, you're going to save the filament cost. You're going to prevent those repeating mistakes, and it's just going to make you guys more confident troubleshooters when it comes to your 3D printing. I remember when I first got a 3D printer and there were problems with it, I felt clueless. I had no idea what to do, and it ended up with the printer just sitting there for months unused because I didn't know how to fix it. And nowadays, when there's a print failure, I know almost exactly what the problem is pretty much right away. There are definitely some times where I still don't quite know what's going on, and so I'm kind of looking around. But most of the time, I'd say probably about 75% of the time, I know exactly what the issue is. I diagnose it immediately, fix it, and in less than 10-15 minutes, that printer is back up and running. So the more you can learn about why your printer is failing and at the same time how to fix it, then the more time and money that you are going to save when 3D printing. So let's talk about the different common failure types. I'm going to go over some of the most common reasons for failure that we see, and failure type number 1 is going to be under extrusion, and you can tell that your prints are under extruded. It's very, very obvious when it does happen. You're going to be having gaps in your prints, gaps in the walls, some thin layers, and especially some very weak or brittle prints. If your prints are just breaking apart with hardly any pressure, that is not right. Your prints should not be breaking unless you have very thin, very small details that are just kind of breaking off. That could be normal, but if you are having normal size 3D prints that shouldn't be breaking because of they're being fragile or them being brittle, if they are just breaking apart like in your hands and you don't have to apply a lot of pressure, that probably means that there is definitely a problem, and the problem is probably under extrusion. So some of the causes for under extrusion are going to be a clogged nozzle. That's going to be probably the most common type. I would say most of the time I get under extrusion, it's because there is some kind of filament, whether it's the same filament or whether it's filament from a previous print, it's wedged in that nozzle and it's not coming out, and that makes the overall diameter or the amount that can come out of that nozzle less than what the printer thinks can come out, and so that causes the under extrusion. You can also have things like an incorrect flow rate, wet filament, your extruder gear slipping, or you could be printing at too low of a temperature. I would say that the top two causes are going to be the clogged nozzle and the printing at too low of a temperature. Although I will say the too low temperature problem doesn't happen too much anymore with how automated everything is in the 3D printing world. But if you are having some under extrusion problems, those are the main things that you're going to want to check. And if those aren't working, then you might just need to disassemble the hot end and try and figure out what's going on there. You can also, another thing that has happened to me is printing what I thought was a certain type of filament, only to find out it was a different type of filament. So that is definitely something to look out for. And especially if you're under extruding on some really high quality engineering grade filaments, so your carbon fibers, your PCs, just really high temperature, tough to print filaments. If you're having some under extrusion there, chances are you got a clogged nozzle. So make sure you look for that if you are having those issues. So some of the fixes, like I said, you can disassemble the whole hot end if you want to try and find the base of the problem, or you could try these simple quick fixes. You can clean the nozzle, sticking those needles that come with almost every 3D printer up there and seeing if you can get rid of the clog. You can increase the print temp, of course, dry your filament. You can also check the tension on your extruder gear. Most of the time, I know for sure on Bambu Labs, because the printers that I have, they have a little screw on the side where you can check the tension on the extruder gear. Those are some of the common fixes that you can try to see if you can fix the under extrusion. I'd say about 80% of the time it's probably going to work. But like I said, a lot of the time it's going to be a clogged nozzle, and just cleaning that nozzle or doing a cold pull will fix the problem. All right, let's talk about failure type number 2, and this is a problem that I've actually been dealing with quite a bit on just one of my 3D printers. Now, I have a lot of the same Bambu Lab printers, but for some reason, one of my P1Ps has been layer shifting almost nonstop. Almost every single print, it layer shifts in the middle of it, and it's gotten increasingly frustrating lately because I was using it to make a 24-hour print, and at the 20th hour, it had a massive layer shift, which basically made the last 20 hours before that completely useless, and I just had to throw the print out. So layer shifting is definitely a big problem because it almost always results in a complete failure. It's really, really hard to save layer shifted parts. Sometimes when you have under extruded parts, you can actually save those parts and you can keep printing with them. But when it comes to layer shifting, just because of the way that it works with the entire print shifted off to the side by a couple millimeters, sometimes a couple centimeters, there's just nothing you can do. You can't really save it, and especially if the geometry of the part matters, then you're just absolutely screwed. There's not much you can do there. Some of the causes for layer shifting, you're going to be looking overall at the build of your printer. So you're going to be looking at the belts, the rods. You're going to be checking to see if those belts are loose. Maybe one of the rods came loose or is crooked, or maybe there's something on the rods that is causing the print head to not move smoothly across those rods. You're going to be looking at the stepper motor. If it's skipping steps, that could be a problem. And the number one thing that I see, or what happens to me, is that the printer has been hit or has been knocked, whether it's hitting the part itself because something has gone wrong, or if it's gotten knocked by just bumping into it. I can't say that's happened to me, but I would say probably about 70% of the time that I have layer shifting, it is actually because excess filament from the filament purging has piled up in the poop chute and has gotten all the way to the point where it's meeting the print head and causing it, and it's basically just running into it, which is causing it to shift and causes that layer shifting problems. So that is definitely something to look out for if you have layer shifting problems, is to make sure the poop chute on your Bambu Labs printers are cleared. I would say, like I said, that's probably about 70% of the time that's what the problem is. And probably 20% of the time is that a print, whether there's a blob or a bump or something failed, the print head knocked into the part itself while it was printing, and that caused the layer shift, and then 10% is just kind of miscellaneous other stuff. I can't say I've had issues with loose belts or stepper motor skipping, But yeah, probably 90% of the time has to do with print filament, the purges piling up in the poop chute, or just hitting the actual printed part itself, in which case that print already had a high chance of failure. So that is definitely something to look out for. Some general fixes that you can look to make with this layer shifting problem is, of course, cleaning out the poop chute, making some kind of, whether you need a different kind of strategy for when it comes out, where it's landing, if it's just going straight and piling up into a box. You can try something different like that and also making sure that is clear is going to help a lot. You can tighten the belts if you want to, lower the print speed. You can check the rails, the rods, make sure nothing's on them. And if you are having issues with the print itself having blobs or having zits on it, and that is what the printer nozzle is running into, then you definitely need to check your print settings, because that is definitely not something that is super common. So you could be printing with the wrong settings. You could be having, for example, PLA settings on a PETG print. So make sure you're double checking all your print settings as well. But those are some of the common fixes for layer shifting. Like I said, layer shifting is definitely a tough failure because oftentimes it's not really savable, but with the right steps, you can definitely make sure that it is not a common occurrence. The last of the common failure types that I wanted to go over is going to be on the print bed itself, and this is something that I'm sure every single 3D printer deals with. Doesn't matter what brand it is, doesn't matter what type it is. Could be Core XY, could be Bedslinger, could be Prusa, could be Bamboo, could be Creality. Every single 3D printer is going to deal with this issue, and that's warping and lifting from the first layer adhesion when it comes to especially the longer 3D prints. And so you're going to be able to tell that you're having warping and lifting issues when your corners peel up, whether your layers pull apart, but almost always what's going to happen is the corners of your part are going to steadily kind of lift up, especially if you're having a longer print, they will lift up more and more. And this is definitely a problem because it's compromising the geometry of your part. If your corners are peeling up, then obviously your corners aren't going to be a perfect 90 degrees, and that could affect the geometry of your part. It could mean that corner is now sticking out more so, or it's not going to fit where it's meant to go if it's meant to fit into another part. And just overall, it could lead to the entire part peeling off of the print bed in the middle of the print, and then you get the giant spaghetti monster. So warping and lifting is definitely a common problem, and that is definitely something to look out for. Some of the causes could be drafts. If you have a fan or your air conditioning that happens to point straight at your 3D printer while you're printing and it's not enclosed, that could definitely be a huge problem. I know I had that when I was printing out of my house. I had that. I didn't even know it was a problem, but none of my prints were working and I couldn't figure out why. And then I moved the 3D printer and all of a sudden the prints were working. So make sure you have no drafts or no wind of any kind going onto your 3D printer while you're actively printing. It could be because you have no enclosure, but oftentimes, the no enclosure is only a real problem if you're not in a super temperature regulated space like a garage with no insulation, or, for example, if you're printing in a shed that has no insulation. That is when it could really become a problem because the nights get colder and the days get hotter, and if you're running long prints, that flexibility in temperature is something that 3D prints don't generally like when you are printing. You could also have really bad bed adhesion, and this is definitely a problem for me. It wasn't a problem because of the bed itself. I was using the wrong type of beds for the wrong type of material. But when I was first starting out, I was having tons of problem with the low bed adhesion, and I eventually figured out that textured PEI sheets are kind of the way to go. They work the best, and now I haven't had nearly as many problems with it. You can also have the incorrect bed temperature. This is more so if you're printing the engineering grade filaments or the super high temperature filaments. If you have a lower bed temperature on something like PEEK or something like the Ultem 1010 or polycarbonate filaments, things that require 100 degree plus bed temperature, if you have it only on 50 or 60, that could cause really bed adhesion and cause your prints to pop off. I know I was having some issues with that with polycarbonate that I was printing, which is a really high temperature filament. I was having the bed temperature way too low, and it just would not stick to save my life. So some of the fixes here, you can use an enclosure. Of course, that's easier said than done. If your printer does not have an enclosure, it can be tough to make one, but even something like a cardboard box can help. If you have a big enough cardboard box to just place over your 3D printer, that will always help. You can increase the bed temp. You can use adhesives, which is my number one, something like Magic Goo. I don't recommend glue stick. Of course, textured PEI is pretty common nowadays, but a bed adhesive like Magic Goo or like what Bamboo Labs kind of adds to their 3D printers, that is really, really helpful, especially if you're using those high temperature prints, or those high temperature filaments that require the 100-degree plus bed temperatures. That is definitely going to be something that's really helpful. You can also change your print settings, for example, adding brims, which is something that I use a lot. Brims are really helpful because they act almost like a hold down clamp, holding those corners in place and keeping them down for longer so that they don't peel up. That's something that I use very commonly in my 3D printing, and it really helps a lot. So those are definitely some of the options to counteract that warping and lifting, but it will almost always be a problem no matter what settings you use, no matter what adhesives you use. It will always be a problem that 3D printers are going to have to constantly deal with. So that is definitely something to look out for. And with that being said, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys were able to learn something about the common 3D print failure types and also how to fix them. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate all the support. It's so many episodes now. I'm so grateful every time I make one. I hope you guys have a good one. I believe this is releasing to the public on Friday after Thanksgiving. So for those of us who celebrate Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving. I hope everybody had a good one. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll talk to you.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
Next time.